our second speaker in this super exciting, we're here for a good time, but not a long time because we're secondary educators. There'll be humor throughout the time we have together. Is my mic on? Oh, just checking. I'm just not that funny. Okay. I'm super excited to invite Leona Prince to share. Leona and I have been connected in different ways throughout the province for a lot of years. Many of you probably know her as a presenter through ERAC. And she's from the center of the province in SD91, which includes Vanderhoof and Fort St. James and Burns Lake. She's the district principal of Aboriginal education, and the district is called Nechako Lakes. And her work around identity and diversity is leading this province. I know she only has a short time to present right now, but just seeing that work that you've done in SD91, Leona, myself having been connected with them for over 10 years, is really super exciting, and we can't wait to hear you share your thoughts. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my slides. I'm using my sister's Wi-Fi, so we're going to be great today. Usually I'm in Burns Lake, which is very rural, and I'm on some not LTE stuff out at my house. So it's great to be, using some optics and stuff. Anyways, Sai Suzi, Leona Prince, Naruto Den Laxamisiu Witsanatan. My name is Leona Prince, like Leighton said, and I'm a member of the Lake Bevy Nation, Naruto, and a member of the Laxamisiu clan, which is the Beaver clan. And that's very important for the discussion that we're going to talk about today, which revolves around the matriarchy and equity, but we'll get into it. So, okay. It shows a really horrible design. You can't see the forward buttons, but let's just go with it. Okay, so I have some guiding questions. What do we mean, as in this presentation, about when we talk about decolonization? What are some potential barriers to equity work? And then the third one, how do we integrate Indigenous worldviews into our classrooms? So when we talk about decolonization, it's often one of those words that, is met with resistance. And, there's several reasons for that. It is a very in-your-face type word, but for the purposes of the work that we do within our school district, what we refer to as decolonization is the lifting up of all worldviews. And then relearning some things. The last time I spoke, I talked about holding up everyone's knowledge as being equal and valid and important and all those things. So we're not trying to take things away, but often what has happened is there's been one worldview that has been celebrated and learned at the expense of our children. And, we heard from Beth about identity, and that of course impacts identity. So the more that we can celebrate the identities of more folks within our schools, the better that our children are going to feel in those institutions. The second piece, when I talk about decolonization, is that we have to relearn some things. And very recently, as of, I don't know when I made that Facebook post, when I learned something and it's like mind blowing, I make a post right away just because I wanted people to share and talk with me if this is just my new learning or I've been missing something for a while. But very recently, I learned about maps. I was not a great geography student, and so I really apologize to any geography teachers in here, history teachers. But when, we back in the day before smartboards and all that, we had these rolly maps and they go down. And for me, this was my accepted view of the world. And it really isn't what the world actually looks like. And so I saw this TikTok, which referenced an Oprah show about, our inequitable view of the world and something that's largely accepted around the world as being true. So how this links to decolonization is that there are things within our system that we do need to relearn, and that's for the benefit of everybody. So upon further digging, I was like, the map that we all accept is the Mercator map, the Mercator projection of the world. And really it was used for navigation. And what it does is countries that are at the center, the equator of the world are like more true sized. And then anything north and south of the equator becomes blown up. And for instance, if you look at Greenland specifically right here, that's what the Mercator map looks like in the light blue, and that's the actual proportion of it. And so look at how Greenland and basically North America, Russia, a lot of the European countries, Scandinavian countries, et cetera, how big they look compared to anything below the equator. And what that does is it makes it a sort of Western dominant map. And that's problematic, especially in terms of equity. I want you to chime in the chat because this is new learning for me. And I thought, okay, was I the only person who didn't know this in the world and just blindly accepted what, the rollout maps in my classroom look like? And so when I looked at this, I thought it was a great example and something that I was going to share with you today about equity. And if you think about, especially if you look at North America and how the Mercator map projects into our own minds about how important we are. And I looked at this, I'm like, man, like Canada isn't even, that much bigger. And I had to really, I met some resistance in my own mind because I was like, this can't be true. And so I did my own looking into it. And I was like, wow. And I don't recall, and I was paying attention, anytime, any of my teachers, and was this their accepted view of the world based on just what's produced by the rolling map companies of the world? And so I went down this huge rabbit hole and came out the other side just looking at this is just an equity issue. And it really is. If most of the Western countries and the more superpowers of the world look bigger than they actually are. And if you look at Central America, Latin America, Africa, and even Australia, parts of India, like if you just boil it down, like how small they looked in comparison because of this perception that we held of the world. And so, I was geeking out because, because this, I was looking at some of the chat, but this just put into sort of a great practical imagining of equity issues within this world. And so how do we then move forward? So if we're looking at from a decolonial mindset, how do we re-engage with this knowledge and teach it so it honors everybody equitably and honors people how they truly are? I get the purpose of this, but somehow along the way, we got our lines crossed and didn't take this for navigation, and these became those maps that we teach in school. So just a little practical application of what I mean by decolonization. It's not saying that things are bad, Beth had talked about that, things being labeled as bad, but maybe just a misalignment or a misrepresentation that we have the opportunity to correct as educators. Okay, so potential barriers. I was happy that Beth brought this up. The first one that I'd like to talk about is fear. And I'm going to talk to you specifically about Indigenous education. And when I talk about that, there's this fear, a healthy fear, a valid fear that educators have within this province, around the world, everywhere. When we want to incorporate Indigenous things, we want to do the right thing. We want to say the right words. We don't want to step over things. And one of the most fearsome words that when we're teaching Indigenous things is protocol. And I remember a time, and I'm going to share this story with you guys because I want everyone to realize that we all can step in it when it comes to protocol. So we had a potlatch, a bathlats, in our school, Nasteo, when I was the vice principal there. And it was an actual potlatch. It wasn't a teaching potlatch. There was a member of my own nation, the Lake Babi Nation, who was buried here in Prince George. And so this was the first time that the Lake Babi Nation held a potlatch off of their own territories, which is a big deal. And they hosted it at the school. We had a beautiful gymnasium there. And I was sitting with my children. We're a matriarchal society. So my children sat with me, and it's my job as a matriarch, as their mother, you pass on, your clanship to your children to tell them the rules. And so the teachers, both Indigenous, non-Indigenous, whoever they were, wanted to take part. So they were sat in different clans. And so we took up the role as Indigenous folks to teach them. And of course, as one of the leaders in the building, they were looking at me and they're going around and serving the soup. And there's one rule that I've learned in my whole time: don't spill the soup. It's a huge faux pas, it breaks protocol. And so I was just talking to my kids, and Susie Williams, I'm going to say her name because we witness things in potlatch and we retell those stories, and that's the purpose of it. So she sat the soup down. We don't have tables, we have paper in front of us, and it spilled. I had no idea what was going to go on, because in my whole life of being in potlatch, I've never witnessed anyone spilling the soup. And one of our denes, our hereditary chiefs, Victor Jimman, who was the district principal here in this district, was sitting next to me. And I was like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? I've never witnessed this in my entire life. And then a member of my hereditary chief, female, was standing behind me, and she stood up, and in our language, she was like, our sister, Leona, she's done this. We're very sorry. And it was the Bear Clan hosting. It was like a big deal. And I'm just shocked because I felt like just this small. And, my kids are looking at me like, oh my goodness, you spilled the soup. So anyways, we go through it. We pay, and before it would have been in goods. This time it was monetarily. We collect money and we pay. We're not even allowed to clean it up ourselves. We get someone else to do that. And it was Susie who came and cleaned it up. I went and I was instructed to pay each of the hereditary chiefs at the head tables just to honor this space, honor that work. And because this was a memorial potlatch for a passing, it was very important, right? So, of course, I was so hesitant the next day at school to go into the lunchroom at lunch because I knew I was going to be teased so bad because, here I am having gone to potlatch my whole life. I should know these things. And I was teased relentlessly at home. And so I did. And I was like, oh, I did that for you guys because I wanted it to be experiential. And that's how you learn best. And we had a good laugh. And I was still teased. So I went up to Michael's, and no, this isn't an endorsement, but great story. I went up and got some t-shirt making materials, and I went and made this t-shirt, wore it proudly, took a picture, sent the photo over to Victor Jim, and it said, soup happens. And so this is one of those things, and I want you guys to know that that's how we learn. That's how we learn. And what's important in this work is your intention. Your intentions are good. Keep doing the work. We all have a starting point and entry point into this work. It's important for us to remember that we shouldn't let our fear of broaching some protocol stop the wonderful work that we're doing for our kids. And it really is for our kids. And if I can mess up that bad in protocol, and that's probably the worst thing I've ever done, and recover from it with grace, you should feel great too. And, I'd reach out for support, build a support team around you as you're doing this work. And if you don't know, ask. If you feel like there's an inkling that something might not be done in a good way, something you're presenting, you have questions about, ask the questions, right? But it's okay to make mistakes and then recover from them. I know, for the educators in my own district, I definitely have their back. And if there's anything that comes out that, may be seen as a step in protocol or something that's done wrong, the first thing I have is their back for sure. And that's important as well. Who are the people around you in your fire that are supporting you in this journey? Go. So Beth brought up cognitive dissonance, and this is really interesting, because she also brought up in a way about resistance, and those two things are definitely linked. And what we're seeing in the media, any social media platform, in our very own workplaces, is cognitive dissonance and resistance to new ideas. And that's because as we do decolonizing work, it feels like, certain folks who've had, and you saw her wheel of different types of privileges, people who feel like they've had those privileges and now, other things are being highlighted. It feels like they're losing something, which is not the truth. So an example of cognitive dissonance that I have seen is about the residential school experience. I've had folks who have heard one person say that they had a good experience in residential schools and sort of did that pan approach of, well, it must have not been bad. And that's their held belief, that they believe this whole time that it's not bad. So anything that they see in the news, or even the stories and the things that are coming to light right now in this time of truth, their own beliefs and the things that they want to hold on to, those core beliefs and values, are being threatened. And so there's the resistance piece. But knowing those words and being empowered by those words are so important. Because if we know that this is a human condition, cognitive dissonance, and we can name it, then we can utilize it and know that it's there and that's something that we can work on. So there's power in knowledge. Okay, so Leighton mentioned, the work that we do in our district. And of course, being in my role, a lot of it has to do with Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And one thing I want to leave you with, in terms of just some additional knowledge, is something practical that you can do within your roles, your various roles, whatever area of secondary that you teach, just a framework so you can engage in this work and feel comfortable. And so Leighton was just meeting with my friend, Dr. Dustin Louie. He's my research partner, and we work together in our district. We've been working on this, and we've been identifying 3 different areas, in this framework. What is our entry point in education? Anytime we're including Indigenous knowledges in our practice, we go through this sort of framework and sort of sort it out for ourselves. So entry point, what's the entry point for our students? And that's, a nod to Shelley Moore, the entry point. Indigenous knowledge, what Indigenous knowledge and values are we utilizing? And is this sustainable? We're trying to move away from performative pieces in Indigenous education into something that's more sustainable and will be helpful to sort of that healthy sense of identity for Indigenous and all students. Because if we look at the folks who have been historically marginalized, and we can identify them even beyond those, as Beth said, those different levels of intersectionality that our students experience, depending on who you are, because you're multifaceted. And I like the Lord quote, and I wrote it down, the single issue struggle. Many of our students come from different levels of intersectionality. And so anything that we can do for all students and make sure that it's sustainable will have meaningful impact over time. So here's the framework. Feel free to utilize it. What I'm going to highlight today is equity for Indigenous girls. This is something that we're working on today and every day, but this year, and it came out of some research that Dustin and I did with teachers, and then also with Indigenous girls last year. Why this is so important? Because if you look at the middle of our province where we live, and if you check out Highway 16, runs through our entire district. This is the Highway of Tears. It's very well known. And for those of you who are unaware, you can Google Highway of Tears and you'll know what I'm talking about. But, really at the heart of, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in this province. And there are 14 First Nations within our school district. So you can tell just by me saying that there is a huge representation of on-reserve girls that exist within our schools. And that's why it's so important for us to look through the lens of equity at these girls and see if there are any barriers that exist for their success. It is also especially important because our society is matriarchal. And that, in itself, through the colonization of the area, has been threatened. And what we hope to do, well, I'll talk to you more about what we hope to do, but the matriarchy is at the center of this. In our research, because like many of you, we're not experts in everything, so we have to go to our knowledge holders and the literature to explore these pieces. What Dustin and I have been doing in our work is using the value systems of our own people, not necessarily the ceremony and those pieces. We would never do Teninye, which is the female rites of passage in our schools, but there's values that come out of that knowledge that we can utilize to empower our students. And so this is our program that we're going to be running this year. It's called Teninye. And that's the Naruto Den, the Lake Babine. There's our nation's logo there. And this was co-written by one of our hereditary chiefs of the Bear Clan, Betty Patrick. And in here, it talks about how, the batlats, the potlatch that we're talking about, how this is also linked to female rites of passage. And this was done regularly within our communities, but, through some of the impacts of relocation and all those other things, it's been largely lost. Having said that, we do have families that still practice this. I myself did not go through Teninye, but family members of mine, very recently, there's a resurgence of this because it's such an important thing to have Indigenous females locate who they are as women, as members of the community, leaders in the community. There's so much that's learned in this whole process that locates you and gives you a sense of self for who you are as an Indigenous woman. And so it's all around the first menstrual cycle, and it's really about the power of women. And so for many of us, even myself, who never went through this, a part of that part of our culture has been lost. And through our research, we realized that our students that were participated in this research, and they were from, the Burns Lake area, from there's 6 stations in that area. These girls gave us an insight into some of the barriers that exist, because our teachers, very well-meaning, said, they're quiet, they have confidence issues, and they themselves, there's actually cultural reasons why Indigenous women in this area would be quiet. I'm not one of them, but the confidence piece was definitely validated by our girls. So you see, there's a quote by Betty Patrick: "We don't teach these traditions and protocols anymore, and the young women and even the men, they have quit respecting their bodies and they have quit learning about this." I think we need to gather the teaching and start to teach the young people, and it has to start at the home. It really connects you with your grandparents and your aunties. So in this, we are identifying the entry point, student engagement and success for Indigenous girls. The Indigenous knowledge is Teninye, and that's a phonetic spelling. For those of you who may be Naruto Den in the audience, that's a phonetic spelling. Sustainability, programming that reflects the principles of Teninye and is built into the public school systems. How do we make this continue so everybody benefits? I'm going to check my time. Okay, holy. Okay, so after the research, after talking to the girls, they helped us build this program. We're focusing in 4 areas. So we're not doing Teninye, which is very ceremonial, very sacred, definitely room to mess up in protocol. But we're looking at these 4 areas as the basis and foundation for this program: identity, leadership, understanding the power of the physical body, and understanding the power of thought. And so if you think about this cultural and language knowledge, roles in community and potential as matriarchs, the physical literacy, including hygiene and mental wellness. So after all that research, we looked at the main needs of the girls, and they fall into these categories, and we're doing it through the value system of Teninye and not ceremony, which protects us in the work that we're doing. So we're not overstepping boundaries and using, as Leighton said, using knowledge that we don't have ownership of or we shouldn't be doing. And that's why I like value systems, because you're taking those pieces, working with the community. We went to Betty Patrick, both Dustin and I, and said, "Can you explain Teninye? Can we learn more about this?" and then, got the permission of the community to engage in this work in this way and even call it that. So there's a lot of work that goes into just checking and rechecking to ensure that cultural safety piece. I think I'm running out of time. So the whole idea of this is a rematriation of our girls, of our society, because there's been a lot taken away. I can go in a whole other session about which parts of colonization took away aspects of being a matriarch, and that's through the chief and council system, I'm just going to name two, and even the trapline system. These things were put into place because at that time women could be hereditary chiefs, which they still are, and leaders, and also own land through the hereditary system, which went through the women or the mother clan, which is a matriarchal piece. So by putting those two things in place, you're disempowering women. And this has had lasting impacts and legacies within our communities, and you see it in our girls. So the one thing that we're doing for equity and equitizing the system for Indigenous girls is creating a program that looks directly at those pieces and decolonizes, but then also revitalizes and builds on the resilience of our people, a program, because we believe that if you lift up our girls, our Indigenous girls, and have them take their place as matriarchs within society, we're going to lift up the nations. This is lifting up the boys. This is lifting up the community and reinstilling some of those lost teachings. Oh, my alarm's about to go off. And Leighton asked me to, I think I'm going to tie this whole thing up right now. What we talked about today, both Beth and I, is thinking about things in a new way, examining the way that we think about things. And it really is about the thoughts that we put out there, because we know that thoughts have power. And this is a passage from a book that's coming out that both another matriarch, my sister, and I wrote, called Be a Good Ancestor. And so the final thing that I want to leave you with today is, I'm going to read this stanza and then I want you to think about this. So be a good ancestor with your thoughts. Thoughts become ideas, ideas become actions, actions become movements, and movements become change. We have seen over the past 5 years how thoughts can become great change, both positively and negatively. So we have to be careful about, the things that we're thinking, because they become actionable. But what I'm going to end with, because I know I'm out of time, is that with everything that you've heard today, take one thing and how are you going to take these new thoughts and move them into action so that they become change within our system. And it can be small, but one thing, because there's a lot that's been presented today, but what is your actionable piece and how will you create change within this system for our children? Masai. Snachalia, everyone.
Thank you, Leona. You bring joy. You embody the manifesting of thoughts into action. I can't say how much I appreciate you're with us today, with the loss that you've had in your family this week and how you made this a priority. I think it helps us just to remember that in our world, folks, our Indigenous elders are passing from COVID because vaccines and colonization are connected. It's a living example of, we just don't even realize the privilege that we have because we haven't lived those experiences ourselves. And Beth and Leona have opened a conversation that's already happening to help us think about, how can I move forward? How can I make this not about fear, but how can we help ourselves engage in what Parker Palmer calls the greatest thing we struggle with, which is diversity is scary when we're leaning or exploring something that's not ourselves. But when we do this work, when we engage in this work, we're making a difference for everyone through the lens of something. Beth, thank you for offering us that idea. Leona, thank you for making it a reality for us and giving us a framework that can be contextualized, whether you're like me and a secondary chemistry teacher, or like Tammy and a secondary English teacher. We can all do this work in our own contexts when we use a lens for change that's an opening, where we think about what that could be and explore it over time and think about the work as sustainable, not a lesson, not something I need, but this is a call to make change. The recording will come out in about a week's time, and you are welcome to share it. But just as Leona and I and Beth were talking about, not everything that was shared on a slide will be shared, sent out, but the recordings themselves are fine. But we really encourage you to say, how can I do this work in my context, or share the recording versus sharing the slides, so that you hear the voice of Beth and Leona sharing the work versus making your own version of it for your own purpose. That's not the work here. The work here is to be specific, to say what could happen here. And we'll see you for session 3, February 23rd, Tammy, is that right? Yes. A reminder will come out because we love sending reminders. Okay, we close with just the reminder that when we engage in equity work, we're working from a pedagogy of love. We are loving ourselves, and we are loving our students and our communities into moving forward, not to guilt others, not to make ourselves feel bad, but to say what's possible when we see the full humanities of those who aren't like us and recognize that that's what changes us, is coming to know ourselves in different ways. Have a great evening. Huge thanks to Beth and Leona. You too. I'm so glad that we got to be together in this session. Have a good night, everyone.